Hi, I'm Brian. This is the second video in a series on code generators. If you didn't watch the first one, there's a whole big mess of tree here, and we're about to explore deeper. So I introduced the previous actors, person and bicycle, and I said that clearly they're related because I drew a line in between them. Any data architect would know that, right? So in the subject of code generators, we said there are a number of input categories, and we were going to classify them partially by input category. So the easiest one is simple config. And I make the argument you don't see this in the wild very often anymore, but it's really useful as an example to see how simple a code generator can be. So we're going to use it to introduce the basic players. We're going to have a bit of a tangent into how annoying type systems are and why, doing code generation, you can't ignore type systems because you're often going to do code generation when you're trying to move between different technology platforms. We'll talk about diversity of output here. So type systems are just in your face all the time. So we're going to look at some examples. We're going to look at why is governance hard? Like there's actually something in here that really clearly calls out like, oh, wait, that's kind of challenging. So simple config as an input, right? So again, a code generator says we've got an input. I've got some kind of templates or rendering. And I've got output, right? So we are software engineers. We've been tasked with building a system that represents people and bicycles and the relationship between them. We're going to write some Java code, some sort of pseudo Java code-ish to show it. Later, we're going to write some SQL. We might make some markup languages, right? We'll look at a couple of examples. But for now, very traditional. We've got to build a system that persists these objects. And we're talking as engineers and we're thinking, we've been writing these Java classes, public class, object, foo, and then listing out all their fields and properties. And then, sometimes we're saving them in databases. So we're making SQL scripts to create tables that, kind of have the same information. And we think that in the future, maybe we're going to have people and bicycles and dogs, right? So we want to build a system that's really easy so that we want to add another thing later, straightforward. So simple config says, this is kind of funny because it's a little bit, you got to get a little bit parsy to do this, but you can do it with regular expressions. It's also why I assert you don't see this in the wild anymore is that most software engineers don't get trained heavily to use regexes as day-to-day power tools. So you don't see this as much. We've got better parsers that are easier. So we've got a file, little text file for each one of these things in our system. And we've already made some assumptions, right? So you've seen some convention here. We'll start with person.text, and it's a one-line text file, right? It's very easy to define things. And we can split this with a regex. We'll split it on commas. And then for each comma thing, we can look at it and we can say, oh, well, this is a field name. So this is last name. We're going to talk about this a lot, right? Last name, first name, date of birth. And bicycles, they have a model and a color and a weight. And then person has bicycle. We've intentionally created kind of a blurry thing here, purchase date and amount, right? So with this basic structure, right, we can write a regex again. We split on the comma. And here in the bike, for model, we have an enumeration, right? So there's a fixed set of categories. Okay, we probably want to be able to model that. We've made like the classic mistake here though, right? And we said color is just an open string. Weight is an int. Okay. An int in what? Is that grams? Is it milligrams? Is it kilograms? I feel like it was int kilograms. It wouldn't be a very precise weight for most bicycles, right? So from a governance standpoint, you'll already see people doing things like adding the units directly to the field name, right? So, weight underscore grams, right? So realistically, this points to, right, for a bike, we've probably got a data model that categorizes things outside of this, that says the weight is in this range and it's this kind of thing. All right. P has B. again, software developers, we like to take shortcuts. I'm not going to spend a lot of time writing person has bike for a bunch of examples. So we have P has B. Hilariously, like by the time we're done talking about this, like P has B will just be in our language, right? You won't even notice that you're translating it. By the way, it's a quick example of how fast the terminology and the code you start using permeates your language, right? So if you go study the domain-driven design folks, they talk about really carefully aligning language from the consumer, right? From the user, from the requirements down into the code. Because if you don't, you create this translation layer. Anyway, so we've got our basic objects here. And what it kind of looks like is that maybe we're modeling a relationship around when did the person buy the bike. So this is P has B. So maybe this is the person owns the bike. All right. I said we've got some inputs here. We're going to use some regular expressions, right? So we're going to write a little script that's going to read each of these files. So read all the files in a directory. Oh, so we already have, we're building a little code generator. We already have kind of a like tool we have to build because we've got to go read like all our input models, right? So we want to kind of go glob those up, right? And now I've got a list of input models, and my templating engine says, well, for each model, I want to create, let's be super simple. We create one file, right? So I've got this template called object maker dot template, TMP, right? And the output, right? Our little engine says we're going to take this is the file name, the original file name. We're going to make a messy one, right? The original file name is going to get pulled in, and that's going to be, translated into the output name. And then we're going to make little Java classes, right? So over here in our output, we're actually going to get person.java. And in here, we're going to see public class person, right? So we're kind of, remember, these are lowercase, but we're going to create some naming conventions. So somewhere in here, we did some string manipulation. And look, we can actually produce all of our, get last name, get L name, put L name, right? Like it's a pretty verbose kind of language, right? So this is far more terse, although from a general code generating standpoint, maybe not super reusable, right? So that is simple config. Oh, you know what? We said we were going to generate some SQL, right? So we've got person.txt over here. It clearly came out of that file. One of the other outputs that we would get. So we would actually be getting, let's talk about output diversity, right? In our templating engine, what we frequently see is, this is delete this. What we frequently have is, so we'll say we're going to do something goofy, right? This is object maker .java .tmp, and this is going to be SQL maker, table maker .sql .tmp. So now we're sort of saying, hey, our templating engine is going to do this, many to many relationship, right? For our code generator. So what we're saying is for each of these input models, I want you to run through each one of these templates. And you can see we've created this little convention. So, template files end with .tmp. And, here's the real output file name. We're going to do some replacement. So now you get, person.java, and you get P has B.java, and bike.java, and you get bike, lowercase, right? No, we're actually going to do bike, right? All uppercase for the SQL folks. Bike.sql and person. And so on and on. So with these three little input files, we've created a bunch of the stuff that we need. And, maybe we're producing good comments in those. And so we're going to run a different code generator, which is the JavaDoc tool. If you're in the Python space, maybe you're generating Python code and the generated code has really good doc strings in it. So now we can go run some other documentation tools and actually get something, human readable. code generator on top of a code generator. We actually do this all the time. Like this pattern of code generating, particularly Java and other, C++, other kind of verbose languages. This is really common. So let's talk about structured texts.